Marcus Johnson had always been a man of quiet strength. He lived in the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. Marcus wasn't one to draw attention to himself. He worked as a mechanic during the day and spent his evenings volunteering at the local community center, helping kids fix broken bikes or teaching them how to change a tire. His hands were calloused from years of hard work, but his heart was soft, especially when it came to children. To those who truly knew him, Marcus was a hero without a cape. On this particular evening, however, everything changed. It started like any other night. Marcus had just finished his shift at the garage and stopped by the grocery store to pick up a few essentials, some bread, milk, and snacks for his son, Jamal. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. As he walked out of the store carrying a brown paper bag, something caught his eye. A tiny figure standing alone on the sidewalk about 50 feet away. At first glance, Marcus thought it might be one of the neighborhood kids playing outside. But as he got closer, he realized it was a little girl, no older than 6, wearing a pink dress that looked slightly dirty. Her blonde hair was tied into pigtails, though one of them had come undone. She clutched a stuffed bunny rabbit tightly against her chest, its ear torn and frayed. What struck Marcus most was the look on her face, wide-eyed, scared, and completely lost. "Hey there," Marcus said gently, crouching down so he wouldn't seem too imposing. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The little girl didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him, her lower lip trembling. Then after what felt like an eternity, she gave a slow nod. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He glanced around, hoping to see someone nearby, maybe a parent frantically searching, but the street was eerily empty. No cars passed by, and the only sound was the distant hum of crickets chirping in the twilight. "I'm not going to hurt you," Marcus assured her, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Do you know your name or where you live?" She hesitated again before whispering, "Emily." That was all she said, but it was enough. Marcus smiled warmly, trying to ease her fear. "Okay, Emily. Let's figure out how to get you home, all right?" He debated his next move carefully. Taking her to the police station seemed like the safest option. After all, if she was missing, her parents would likely report it soon, and the authorities could help reunite her with her family faster. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that picking up a strange child, even with good intentions, might raise eyebrows. In a town like Willow Creek, where racial tensions simmered beneath the surface despite outward appearances of harmony, Marcus knew better than to assume people would give him the benefit of the doubt. But he couldn't leave her there either. So making sure to keep his movements slow and deliberate, Marcus extended his hand. "Come on, Emily, we'll find someone who can help us." To his relief, she slipped her small hand into his. The gesture was trusting, innocent, and heartbreaking, all at once. Together they began walking toward the nearest police station, which was only a few blocks away. Along the way, Marcus tried to make light conversation, asking Emily about her bunny or whether she liked ice cream. She responded in short, shy sentences, but it was clear she was still frightened. Unbeknownst to Marcus, their journey hadn't gone unnoticed. A man passing by in his car had spotted them together and immediately reached for his phone. To him, the sight of a black man holding hands with a young white girl triggered alarm bells. Without stopping to ask questions or consider context, he dialed 911. "There's a suspicious guy with a little girl," the caller reported urgently. "He looks like he's trying to take her somewhere. You need to send someone quick." Within minutes, the quiet streets of Willow Creek erupted into chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus froze mid-step when he saw flashing red and blue lights approaching. At first, he thought perhaps the police were responding to a different situation. But then 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt beside them, blocking the sidewalk. Officers jumped out of their vehicles, guns drawn. "Step away from the child," one of them barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Marcus instinctively raised his hands, dropping the grocery bag in the process. Bread and milk tumbled onto the pavement. "It's not what it looks like," Marcus shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "I found her wandering alone. I was taking her to the police station." But his words fell on deaf ears. Another officer grabbed Emily, pulling her away from Marcus, while a third officer shoved him roughly against the hood of a car. Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, cold and unforgiving. Through the blur of confusion and adrenaline, Marcus locked eyes with Emily. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out, "No! He helped me!" Her plea went ignored. Marcus was shoved into the back seat of a squad car, his mind racing. How had this happened? One moment he was doing the right thing, and the next, he was being treated like a criminal. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years working to build trust in a community that now doubted him in an instant. As the car sped away, Marcus stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of Willow Creek fade into the distance. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would test his faith, resilience, and humanity in ways he never imagined. The arrest of Marcus Johnson sent shockwaves through Willow Creek, a town that prided itself on being peaceful and close-knit. News traveled fast, especially when it involved something as explosive as accusations of kidnapping. By the time Marcus was booked at the police station, the story had already leaked to local media outlets. Reporters scrambled to piece together details, relying heavily on eyewitness accounts and snippets provided by anonymous sources within the police department. Within hours, Marcus's face appeared on television screens and social media feeds. Across the county, headlines screamed for attention. Local man arrested in shocking kidnapping case. Father of one accused of abducting young girl. And perhaps the most damaging of all, community hero or hidden threat. The articles painted a picture of Marcus as someone who might have been hiding sinister intentions behind his otherwise ordinary life. Quotes from unnamed neighbors hinted at suspicions they'd harbored about him for years, claims that were exaggerated or entirely fabricated but nonetheless fueled public outrage. Social media erupted into a frenzy. People who had once smiled at Marcus at community events or trusted him to fix their cars now questioned everything they thought they knew about him. Comment sections overflowed with vitriol. Some users shared memes mocking him, while others called for harsh punishment, labeling him guilty before any trial had even taken place. Even those who tried to defend him found themselves drowned out by the tide of anger and prejudice. Marcus's family bore the brunt of this backlash. His wife, Lisa, struggled to explain to their 9-year-old son, Jamal, why his father wasn't coming home. Jamal, bright-eyed and full of energy, didn't understand why people were saying such terrible things about his dad. "But Daddy helps people," he protested, tears streaming down his cheeks. "He fixes bikes and gives kids snacks. Why are they mad at him?" Lisa tried her best to shield Jamal from the worst of it, but it was impossible to ignore the whispers at school or the hateful messages left on their voicemail. Neighbors who used to wave hello now avoided them altogether, crossing the street to avoid eye contact. At the grocery store, cashiers seemed reluctant to serve Lisa, and she could feel the weight of judgmental stares burning into her back. It was as if overnight, the Johnsons had become pariahs in their own community. Meanwhile, Emily Thompson, the little girl at the center of the storm, was reunited with her frantic parents. Her mother, Rachel, and father, Tom, had been beside themselves with worry after realizing Emily was missing during a family picnic earlier that day. They hugged her tightly, tears streaming down their faces, relieved to have their daughter safe. But when detectives sat down with Emily to ask what happened, her answers only added to the growing complexity of the case. She said the man who found her was nice, Detective Sarah Collins noted during a briefing with her colleagues. Sarah was one of the few officers who approached the investigation with an open mind, refusing to let preconceived notions cloud her judgment. She had reviewed the initial reports and couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. According to Emily, the man, later identified as Marcus, had simply asked if she needed help and then walked her toward the police station. There was no mention of threats, coercion, or anything sinister. Unfortunately, Emily's testimony barely registered with the lead prosecutor, Andrew Hayes, who was eager to make an example of Marcus. Hayes argued that children often misinterpreted situations involving adults, particularly when fear was involved. He dismissed Emily's account as unreliable, insisting that circumstantial evidence supported moving forward with charges against Marcus. After all, the caller who reported the incident described seeing a black man with a young white girl, a description that matched Marcus perfectly. As days turned into weeks, Marcus remained behind bars, awaiting trial. The conditions of his detention were grim. He shared a cell with another inmate, a gruff man named Carl who claimed to be innocent but spent most of his time pacing like a caged animal. Marcus tried to stay positive, leaning on memories of his family and the knowledge that he hadn't done anything wrong. Still, the isolation weighed heavily on him. Phone calls with Lisa were brief and monitored, leaving little room for real conversation. Each visitation session felt like a cruel reminder of how far he'd been torn from the life he loved. Outside the jail walls, Lisa fought tirelessly to clear her husband's name. With the help of a local attorney, she gathered character references from friends, colleagues, and community members who vouched for Marcus's integrity. Dozens of people came forward, sharing stories of how Marcus had gone above and beyond to help others, whether it was fixing a single mom's car for free or mentoring troubled teens. Yet these testimonials did little to sway public opinion. In the court of public perception, Marcus was already convicted. Detective Sarah Collins, however, refused to give up. Something about the timeline of events nagged at her. If Marcus had truly been planning to abduct Emily, why would he walk her toward a police station? Why not take her somewhere more secluded? And what about the original caller's description? It struck Sarah as vague and incomplete, almost as if the person reporting the incident hadn't actually witnessed much at all. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah revisited the scene where Marcus and Emily were apprehended. She retraced their steps, paying close attention to the surrounding area. A nearby convenience store caught her eye. It had security cameras positioned near the entrance. Hoping for a breakthrough, Sarah requested access to the footage. What she discovered would change the course of the investigation forever. The grainy video showed Emily wandering alone along the sidewalk, clutching her stuffed bunny. For nearly 20 minutes, she meandered aimlessly, looking lost and frightened. Then, just moments before Marcus appeared, another figure entered the frame, a tall man wearing a hoodie and jeans. He lingered in the background, watching Emily intently but never approaching her. When Marcus finally came into view, the mysterious man slipped away, disappearing down a side street. Sarah's heart raced as she replayed the clip multiple times. This new information contradicted the narrative that Marcus was the primary suspect. Someone else had clearly been following Emily, and that someone had vanished shortly before Marcus intervened. Could this shadowy figure be the real threat? Armed with this revelation, Sarah dug deeper. She ran facial recognition software on the man in the hoodie, cross-referencing it with databases of known offenders. It wasn't long before a match popped. A Richard Grayson, a disgraced former teacher with a troubling past. Grayson had been fired years ago for inappropriate behavior toward students, though he had managed to avoid serious legal consequences due to insufficient evidence. Now it seemed, he had resurfaced in Willow Creek, and possibly for all the wrong reasons. With this new lead, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, and for the first time since Marcus's arrest, justice seemed within reach. But proving Grayson's involvement wouldn't be easy. She needed concrete evidence, and she needed it fast. As Sarah prepared to confront the man who may have orchestrated the entire ordeal, she couldn't help but wonder, would the truth come out in time to save Marcus from a fate he didn't deserve? Detective Sarah Collins wasn't the kind of person to give up easily. She had spent years working in law enforcement, and while she'd seen her fair share of injustices, this case struck a chord deep within her. Something about Marcus Johnson's arrest didn't sit right. The more she looked into it, the more she felt that the truth was being buried under layers of assumptions and biases. Determined to uncover what really happened, Sarah dove headfirst into the investigation, refusing to let anything, or anyone, stand in her way. Her first breakthrough came from the surveillance footage at the convenience store. The grainy video showed Emily wandering alone for nearly 20 minutes before Marcus appeared. But what stood out most was the shadowy figure lingering in the background, the man in the hoodie who seemed to be watching Emily intently. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this person held the key to unraveling the mystery. Using facial recognition software, Sarah identified the man as Richard Grayson, a name that sent chills down her spine once she began digging into his past. Richard had been a teacher at a nearby school until he was fired several years ago for inappropriate behavior toward students. Allegations had swirled around him, but without concrete evidence or willing witnesses, the charges against him were dropped. Since then, he had disappeared from public view, leading a quiet life on the fringes of society. Sarah knew she needed to tread carefully. If Richard was involved in Emily's disappearance, he would likely go to great lengths to cover his tracks. She decided to start by revisiting the area where Emily had been found. Maybe there were other clues waiting to be discovered, things that had been overlooked during the initial rush to judgment. Her instincts paid off when she noticed a small patch of disturbed dirt near the sidewalk, partially hidden by overgrown weeds. Crouching down, Sarah examined it closely. It looked like someone had recently stepped there, leaving faint imprints of shoe treads. She flagged the spot for forensic analysis, hoping it might yield DNA or other trace evidence. Sure enough, lab results later confirmed the presence of fibers matching a specific type of fabric, one commonly used in hoodies. Armed with this new information, Sarah turned her attention to Richard's recent activities. She obtained a warrant to search his home and vehicle, knowing it was a long shot but worth pursuing. When officers arrived at Richard's modest apartment, they found it cluttered and unkempt, filled with stacks of old newspapers and empty soda cans. But it was what they discovered in his closet that truly raised alarms, a collection of photographs, articles, and notes about children from the community. Some of the images were candid shots taken at playgrounds or parks, while others appeared to be screenshots from social media profiles. Among the materials was a crumpled piece of paper with a list of names, including Emily Thompson's. Written beside her name was the date and time she went missing, a chilling detail that directly tied Richard to the incident. Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized the scope of what she was dealing with. This wasn't just a random act. It was part of a pattern, a deeply disturbing pattern. With mounting evidence pointing to Richard, Sarah decided it was time to bring him in for questioning. She approached the task cautiously, knowing how delicate the situation was. When officers knocked on Richard's door, he answered with a look of mild surprise, pretending to be cooperative. Dressed in sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, he invited them inside, though his demeanor shifted slightly when they mentioned Emily's name. "Emily?" Richard asked, feigning confusion. "I don't know any Emily." Sarah studied his face closely, searching for cracks in his carefully constructed facade. "We have reason to believe you were in the area where she went missing," she said evenly. "Care to explain why?" Richard hesitated, his eyes darting toward the corner of the room. For a moment it seemed like he might deny everything, but then his shoulders slumped in resignation. "All right, fine," he admitted reluctantly. "I saw her walking alone. I thought maybe she needed help." "And what did you do after that?" Sarah pressed, her voice firm but measured. "I didn't do anything wrong," Richard insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "I just watched her for a bit. I wasn't going to hurt her, I swear." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She laid out the evidence piece by piece. The surveillance footage showing him following Emily, the fibers found near the scene, the incriminating documents in his apartment. Each revelation chipped away at Richard's defenses until he could no longer maintain his story. Finally, under intense pressure, Richard broke down. He confessed to stalking Emily but claimed his intentions weren't malicious, at least not in the way people might assume. According to him, he had been drawn to her innocence, a trait he described as pure and untouched. His words sent shivers through the room, revealing a disturbing fixation that bordered on obsession. While he denied planning to physically harm her, his actions spoke louder than his excuses. The confession was a turning point in the case. With Richard's admission, Sarah immediately informed the district attorney's office, urging them to reconsider the charges against Marcus. It was clear now that Marcus had been nothing more than a good Samaritan caught in the crossfire of a much darker situation. News of Richard's arrest spread quickly, sending ripples through Willow Creek. People who had been so quick to condemn Marcus now faced the uncomfortable reality that their assumptions had led to a grave miscarriage of justice. Social media, which had once been flooded with accusations against Marcus, began to shift gears. Posts defending him started gaining traction, accompanied by apologies from those who had jumped to conclusions too hastily. For Marcus, however, the damage had already been done. Weeks spent behind bars had taken a toll on him physically and emotionally. Though he remained hopeful, the experience had left scars that wouldn't fade anytime soon. Lisa visited him as often as she could, bringing updates about the investigation and assuring him that the truth was finally coming to light. Still, the uncertainty weighed heavily on both of them. Meanwhile, Emily's parents, Rachel and Tom, struggled to process everything they had learned. They had initially believed the worst about Marcus, blinded by fear and societal conditioning. But as the facts emerged, guilt set in. During a tearful meeting with Lisa arranged by Detective Collins, they expressed their regret and extended heartfelt thanks for Marcus's kindness toward their daughter. He protected her, Rachel said, her voice trembling, and we failed to see it. Tom nodded solemnly. We owe him an apology, and so does everyone else. As the dust began to settle, Detective Collins reflected on the case. It was a stark reminder of how easily prejudice could cloud judgment, even among those sworn to uphold justice. But it was also proof that persistence and integrity could still prevail, no matter how daunting the odds. With Richard behind bars and Marcus's name cleared, the town of Willow Creek faced a reckoning. Conversations about racial bias and systemic injustice became unavoidable, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their community. For Marcus, the journey ahead would be challenging, but he clung to the hope that lessons had been learned, and that karma, in its own unpredictable way, had delivered a measure of justice after all. The arrest of Richard Grayson sent shockwaves through Willow Creek, but unlike the frenzy surrounding Marcus Johnson's case, this time the town was forced to confront a far darker reality. Detective Sarah Collins had worked tirelessly to ensure that every piece of evidence against Richard was airtight before presenting it to the district attorney. The weight of the investigation rested heavily on her shoulders, knowing that any misstep could allow a dangerous individual to slip through the cracks. But as she stood in the courtroom during Richard's arraignment, watching him sit stoically beside his lawyer, Sarah felt a small sense of vindication. Justice, though delayed, was finally within reach. Richard's confession had been damning enough, but the forensic evidence sealed his fate. Fibers from his hoodie matched those found near where Emily had wandered alone, and further analysis revealed traces of dirt consistent with the scene. His apartment, once a hidden lair of obsession, now served as a treasure trove of incriminating material. Among the photographs and notes were disturbing writings detailing his fascination with children, a pattern that stretched back years. It became clear that Emily wasn't his first target. She was simply the latest in a string of victims who had narrowly escaped harm. As word of Richard's arrest spread, the media narrative shifted dramatically. Headlines that had once vilified Marcus Johnson were replaced with exposés on Richard's predatory behavior. Local news anchors interviewed experts who explained how individuals like Richard often operated under the radar, exploiting loopholes in the justice system to avoid accountability. One segment even featured an interview with a former student of Richard's who tearfully recounted how he had manipulated and intimidated her during her school years. Her courage inspired others to come forward, each sharing their own harrowing experiences. For Marcus, the change in public perception came too late to erase the pain of wrongful imprisonment. Days turned into weeks as he awaited the dismissal of charges, and though he tried to stay hopeful, the toll of his ordeal was evident. His once bright eyes now carried a shadow of weariness, and his interactions with fellow inmates grew increasingly distant. He spent hours staring at the cracked ceiling of his cell, replaying the events that led him here. How could doing the right thing have landed him in such a nightmare? The question haunted him, gnawing at his faith in humanity. Lisa, his wife, remained his steadfast advocate, visiting him as often as the prison schedule allowed. She brought updates about the investigation, sharing every development no matter how small. On one particularly emotional visit, she told him about the growing number of people apologizing for doubting him. "They're starting to see the truth." "Marcus," she said, gripping his hand tightly through the glass partition. "It's not fair what happened to you, but we'll get through this. Together." Marcus nodded, though the words felt hollow. Forgiveness wasn't something he could muster yet, not when the scars ran so deep. Still, he appreciated Lisa's unwavering support, knowing she was fighting just as hard as he was to reclaim their lives. Meanwhile, Emily's parents, Rachel and Tom Thompson, grappled with their role in the tragedy. They had initially believed the worst about Marcus, swayed by fear and societal biases. Now, faced with the horrifying reality of Richard Grayson's actions, they couldn't help but feel immense guilt. Their mistrust of Marcus hadn't just contributed to his suffering, it had overshadowed the real threat lurking in their community. Determined to make amends, they reached out to Lisa and arranged a meeting. The encounter took place in a quiet park, away from prying eyes and judgmental whispers. Rachel and Tom approached Marcus and Lisa with trembling voices and tear-filled eyes. "We can't apologize enough," Rachel began, her voice breaking. "You saved our daughter, and we treated you like you were the villain. We were wrong, so wrong," Tom added. "We should have listened to Emily. She kept saying you were kind, but we didn't hear her. We let our fears blind us." Marcus listened silently, his expression unreadable. Part of him wanted to lash out, to vent the frustration and anger that had built up over weeks of injustice. But another part understood their remorse. After all, they had been victims too, of Richard's manipulation and a flawed system quick to judge based on appearances. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "I forgive you," he said simply. "But forgiveness doesn't fix everything. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone else." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Rachel and Tom nodded, vowing to use their platform to speak out against racial bias and advocate for reforms in law enforcement practices. It was the least they could do to honor Marcus's resilience and prevent similar tragedies in the future. Back in the courtroom, Richard's sentencing hearing drew widespread attention. Victims from his past joined Emily's family in testifying about the lasting impact of his actions. One woman described how his inappropriate advances had shattered her confidence as a teenager, leaving her afraid to trust authority figures. Another recounted how his stalking had forced her to change schools multiple times, disrupting her education and social life. Each story painted a clearer picture of Richard's calculated cruelty, exposing him not as a misunderstood loner, but as a predator who preyed on the vulnerable. The judge listened intently, her face etched with sorrow and resolve. When it was time for sentencing, she delivered a verdict that echoed through the packed courtroom. Richard Grayson would spend the next 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The decision was met with audible sighs of relief from those in attendance, many of whom had feared a lighter sentence given his history of evading consequences. For Marcus, the formal dismissal of charges came shortly after Richard's conviction. Standing outside the courthouse with Lisa and Jamal by his side, he addressed the crowd of reporters gathered to document the moment. "This has been the hardest chapter of my life," he admitted, his voice tinged with both exhaustion and determination. "But I want people to remember this. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, and sometimes it comes with a cost. That doesn't mean we stop trying. If anything, it means we try harder." His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations across Willow Creek about prejudice, accountability, and redemption. Community leaders organized forums to discuss systemic issues within law enforcement, inviting Marcus to share his story. Though hesitant at first, he eventually agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to turn his suffering into something meaningful. As the days passed, life slowly began returning to normal, or as close to normal as possible. Marcus returned to work, at the garage, greeted warmly by customers who had once doubted him. Jamal resumed his bike riding adventures, proudly showing off the repairs his dad had taught him to make. And Lisa, Ever the pillar of strength, continued advocating for justice reform, ensuring that Marcus's ordeal wouldn't be forgotten. In the end, karma had indeed delivered its verdict, not just for Richard Grayson, but for the entire town of Willow Creek. The experience had exposed painful truths, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable realities about themselves and their community. For Marcus, it was a reminder that while justice may take time, it is never truly denied. And for everyone else, it was a lesson in humility, empathy, and the enduring power of truth. The dismissal of charges against Marcus Johnson marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him and his family, but for the entire town of Willow Creek. The case had left deep scars on the community, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about racial bias, systemic injustice, and the dangers of jumping to conclusions. While the wounds were still fresh, there was also a sense of hope, a shared determination to learn from the past and build a better future. For Marcus, life didn't return to normal overnight. Even after he was officially cleared of all accusations, the emotional toll lingered. He had spent weeks behind bars, separated from his loved ones, enduring harsh conditions and constant scrutiny. Though he tried to focus on rebuilding his life, moments of anger and sadness would creep in unexpectedly. Sometimes it happened when a neighbor offered a half-hearted apology, or when someone stared at him in the grocery store as if unsure whether to trust him. Other times it came during quiet nights when he replayed the events in his mind, wondering how differently things might have unfolded if circumstances had been just slightly different. But Marcus refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his energy into something positive, helping others avoid the same fate. With Lisa's encouragement, he began speaking publicly about his experience, sharing his story at schools, churches, and community centers. His talks weren't filled with anger or blame. Instead, they focused on resilience, empathy, and the importance of looking beyond surface-level judgments. "I'm not here to point fingers," he often said during these sessions. "I'm here to remind you that we're all human. We make mistakes, sure, but we can also grow from them." His words resonated deeply with audiences, particularly young people who admired his ability to rise above adversity. Jamal, now older and more aware of what his father had endured, took pride in seeing Marcus use his pain to inspire others. Together, they started volunteering more frequently at the community center, teaching kids practical skills like fixing bikes, while also fostering open conversations about respect, kindness, and standing up for what's right. The bond between father and son grew stronger through these shared experiences, becoming a source of healing for both of them. Meanwhile, Emily's family continued their efforts to support Marcus and advocate for change. Rachel and Tom Thompson became vocal proponents of reform within law enforcement, working closely with Detective Sarah Collins and other officials to implement training programs aimed at reducing implicit bias. They also partnered with local organizations to raise awareness about child safety, emphasizing the importance of recognizing genuine threats without unfairly targeting innocent individuals. Their transformation from skeptics to allies served as a powerful example of redemption and accountability. Detective Sarah Collins, too, emerged as a hero in her own right. Her relentless pursuit of justice for Marcus and her refusal to accept easy answers earned her widespread respect. She received commendations from her superiors and praise from the community, though she remained humble about her role. "This wasn't about me," she insisted during an interview. "It was about doing the job the way it's supposed to be done, with fairness and integrity." Inspired by the case, Sarah spearheaded initiatives to improve investigative practices, ensuring that similar tragedies could be prevented in the future. As for Richard Grayson, his sentencing brought a measure of closure to those he had harmed. Locked away in prison, he faded into obscurity, remembered only as a cautionary tale. Yet his arrest served as a catalyst for broader discussions about mental health, predatory behavior, and the need for early intervention. Experts pointed out that cases like his highlighted gaps in the system, opportunities where warning signs could have been addressed before escalating into criminal activity. These insights prompted calls for increased funding for counseling services and stricter oversight of individuals flagged for inappropriate conduct. In the months following the resolution of the case, Willow Creek underwent a subtle yet significant transformation. Conversations about race, privilege, and prejudice became less taboo, encouraged by leaders determined to foster understanding and unity. Community forums drew diverse crowds, with residents openly discussing their fears, biases, and aspirations for a more inclusive society. Some even formed committees dedicated to addressing systemic issues, such as disparities in education, employment, and housing. Slowly but surely, the town began to heal. Marcus noticed these changes firsthand. Where once he felt isolated and mistrusted, he now found himself embraced by neighbors eager to rebuild bridges. Old friends reconnected with him, apologizing for their initial doubts and expressing gratitude for his willingness to forgive. Strangers approached him with words of admiration, thanking him for setting an example of grace under pressure. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension and misunderstanding, but progress was undeniable. One evening, as Marcus sat on his porch watching the sunset, he reflected on everything that had transpired. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He thought about the little girl who had wandered alone that fateful night, the man in the hoodie who had followed her, and the chain of events that had changed so many lives forever. In that moment, he realized something profound. Sometimes, the hardest trials reveal the true strength of the human spirit. Lisa joined him on the porch, handing him a cup of tea. "Thinking about everything?" she asked softly, sitting beside him. Marcus nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, just thinking about how far we've come and how much farther we still have to go." "Together," Lisa added, squeezing his hand. "We'll get there together." And as the sky turned shades of purple and gold, Marcus allowed himself to believe her. Despite the pain and hardship, he knew one thing for certain. Karma had delivered its verdict, and justice, though imperfect, had ultimately prevailed. For Marcus Johnson, that was enough to keep moving forward one step at a time.